here in Broomfield. This is a green calendar class on integrated pest management. The green calendar is an awesome collaborative program coordinated by Broomfield Environmental Services. So this is, I believe, the second to last class of this season. Next one is June 17th, residential lawn care. Our presenter today is Jocelyn Schilling. She's one of our Colorado Master Gardener volunteers. She also works seasonally at the Denver Botanic Gardens, and she is a whiz at pests and pest management and all things entomology. So we're super excited to have her here. And Jocelyn, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Integrated Pest Management. Is it going? Oh, sorry about that. So what is integrated pest management? So basically what IPM is an ecosystem-based approach to reduce pests. And this is very important. It's a combination of multiple techniques. If you only took one thing from this presentation today, it's that never rely on one tactic. Each tactic has its weakness, and if you rely on one, it's just going to hurt you in the long run. And some of the benefits are you can prevent damage long term. It's a lot less harmful to the environment and to us, and it is a lot more economic than just the spraying of pesticides. Sorry, the slideshow seems to not want to go right now.
Jocelyn, maybe try the arrows on the keyboard, maybe? I don't know.
Okay, cool. That worked. All right, sorry about that. So what is a pest? A pest can be any organism that damages desirable plants or humans or just any desirable organism. And they can be plants, vertebrates, invertebrates, nematodes, or pathogens. All right, so IPM is an ecosystem-based approach, and basically, in order to use it properly, you need to have knowledge of the pest you're dealing with, of the plant that you have, and the ecosystem as a whole. And the ecosystem can be anything from the United States to Colorado to just your backyard in general. So an ecosystem approach, basically, you take advantage of the natural checks and balances, such as in the environment, such as the natural predators, and essentially you take advantage of these controls. So there are 5 components to IPM, and so the first one is pest identification. Obviously, you need to know what pest you're dealing with, what kind of damage it does, and if you want to take the next steps. The second is monitoring or assessing, pretty much assessing just monitoring the pest, what damage it does, and do you need to take action? And that leads us to the third, which is threshold use. So basically what a threshold is the amount of damage needed to take action. So it's the point where the pest is doing so much damage that it's harming your yield, or it just doesn't look very good. And fourth is to try and prevent pest problems in the first place, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And finally, is using a combination of tactics. Again, never rely on one tactic. So in order to get started, first you need to use identification. So you can use books or dichotomous keys. And what a dichotomous key is pretty much saying, all right, is this pest red? Okay, go here. Does this pest have claw or have long front legs? Go here. And it just kind of leads you down a little road to figure out what pests you have. You can also contact your local extension office, which is us if you live in Broomfield. You can always look at stuff up on the internet. However, be careful of your source. Make sure it's EDU. That tends to be the best source out there. And is it a pest? It might not be a pest. It might be a beneficial insect in your garden. So monitoring, basically you need to check the plant or site on a regular basis, and it may involve trapping to figure out what the pest is, or sampling, which is trying to figure out how much of the pest there is. So now we get to thresholds. Again, the threshold is the amount of damage needed to take action. So this could be economic, it's ruining your crop yield, or it could be aesthetic, it just does not look very good. And of course, the fourth one we get is prevention, and prevention is key here. How do you prevent pest problems? You take care of your plants. Make sure they get good water, make sure they get the proper amount of light, make sure they get the proper amount of drainage. Healthy plants, they have fewer pests, they tolerate pests better, and problems can compound. If your plant has one problem, it can lead to another problem and another, and it's just as worse for the overall plant health. So, and basically, how you take care of your plant is make sure you put what we say at Master Gardener here, as Master Gardeners, is right plant, right place. Make sure you put your plant in a proper place. If it's a plant that needs a lot of sun, put it in a sunny spot. If it needs shade, put it in a shady spot. If you and make sure you put the right type of soil. And this is very important. If you have potted plants, never, ever, ever put it in a pot with poor to no drainage, because that is just gonna, you never want that. That's just gonna cause a lot of problems for the plants. Root rot is just one. And if you're planting vegetables or non-native plants outside, you probably want the usual store-bought peat moss soil. If you have a native plant that can tolerate this soil, because our soil is pretty alkaline, and plants tend to like slightly acidic soil. And obviously, you see the left picture. Don't do that. That's just a horrible place to plant a tree. It's not going to do well there. And if you take a look at the right picture, If you are to stake a tree, make sure that you mark a year on your calendar after you stake that tree. Otherwise, you're going to get stuff like this, where the stake just ends up growing into the tree and it does not do any good for the tree at all. And another thing, USDA zones. So basically, if you don't know what the zone is, it goes to 1, and I believe it's like 13 or so. 1 is the coldest it can get. Think like the tundra up here. And then 13 is like the most tropical you can get. Here in Colorado, in the Front Range, we have, our zone is 5. If you live up in the mountains, it's going to be 3 or 4. But you want to be sure you get plants that are hardy to your particular zone. And of course, apply appropriate amount of water and fertilizer. And that'll keep your plants healthy. And that should keep them from getting pests. So the types of control that we have, there's four different types. There's mechanical control, which is like pulling weeds or smushing. There's biological control, where we introduce natural predators. Then there's cultural control, which is essentially modification of the growing environment that will reduce pests. And of course, chemical control, which is obviously using chemicals to control pests. So physical control is removal of the pest by hand. It can be pulling, pruning, swashing, etc. So physical control, so sanitizing tools is a very, very important thing to do each season. It's just good practice. And if you look at the right picture, you will notice fire blight. Fire blight is a disease, a bacterial disease in the Rosaceae family, so the rose family, that devastates fruit orchards. If you're dealing with a disease like this, you want to be sure you sanitize in between cuts if you're trying to remove diseased plant parts. Obviously, it's called fire blight because it looks like it's been burned. And yeah, basically sanitizing things each season is just good practice, good way to go. So another form of physical control is fence. You can put barriers and fences up, or you can put traps up. The trap you see to the right is a very common greenhouse trap called the yellow sicky trap. And basically it works because bugs are attracted to the bright yellow color source, and then the stickiness will of course hold them in place and they die. So all right, yeah, physical control is pretty straightforward. Now we move on to biological control. So this method uses natural predators to control pests. And you need to have a really good knowledge about the pests, predators, and the ecosystem in order to use this method properly. So there are a few ways you can use a few different types of biological control. You can use predators, you can use parasitoids and pathogens. Predators obviously eat prey. Parasitoids inject young into their host. We'll get to that in a minute. And then pathogens pretty much kill from the inside. But sometimes it can be really difficult to tell if something is a pest or a predator. Generally, pests usually are in colonies, like in the whiteflies you see in the left picture, while predators tend to be solitary, like the green lacewing in the right picture. If you're not sure if it's a pest or predator, leave it alone and do some research before taking action. You never know, it could be a beneficial insect that helps keep these pests under control. speaking of beneficial insects and arachnids, here are some that you may come across in your garden, and these guys are good guys. They will help you out. So we get to lady beetles, ladybugs. Of course, we all know that ladybugs are good predators of aphids. However, they also can feed on many different other types of insects. There are even species that specialize on a particular pest, such as the mealybug destroyer, which targets the common greenhouse pest mealybugs, which are really annoying and disgusting. Basically, the larvae have a very distinct alligator look. So there can be a lot of lookalikes out there to lady beetles, and I would say basically the main distinguishing feature is the round body. If you see the round body, you probably got a lady beetle. If you see elongated, like the cucumber beetle to the right there, it's probably not a ladybug. The head is also pointed down in ladybugs, and they have a lot shorter antennae. As you can tell, the beetles on the right have much longer antennae. And ladybugs can come in all sorts of different colors, not just red and black. So keep that in mind. All right, now we get to these guys, the lacewings, and they eat aphids, scales, caterpillars, and a lot of other different types of insects. The adults prey on insects, but they also need pollen and nectar. But what you want is the larvae. The larvae are the voracious little buggers. And these guys are hoverflies, and basically they feed off of aphids and other soft-bodied insects, but the adults only feed on pollen and nectar. Okay, so hoverflies versus lookalikes. Basically, hoverflies are what I like to call flies disguised as bees, and that's pretty much what they are. They mimic bees, so they're not targeted by predators. Basically, the main way to tell the difference is the eyes, the arrangement of eyes. So bees tend to have more of an open side. They tend to be more separated on the head, while flies tend to be that of closer together. Another thing is these hoverflies, flies and their kin, mosquitoes included, are the only group of insects in the insect kingdom that have 2 wings. Everything else has 4. And so if you notice the way they fly, they'll just hover. They can't fly like an insect with 4 wings. Basically, instead of keeping their extra pair of wings, flies have modified their second pair of wings into something we call halteres. And the blue arrow on the left points to them. But what halteres do is pretty much acts as a gyroscope when they fly. So it measures wind speed and things like that. And obviously, wasps tend to have like a very skinny waist and maybe a little bit more brighter colors than the hoverflies. And also look at those eyes. Oh yes, and they tend to have a lot shorter antenna than bees and wasps as well. And then, as you can tell, the larvae look different. The larvae of the hoverfly is very clear, and the larvae of the bee or wasp over here is very brown and striped. All right, now we move on to ground beetles. So the adults and larvae are very effective predators against ground insects like snails and slugs. Slugs are not insects, sorry, and seeds. And if you've ever seen darkling beetles, they definitely fall into this category. And then also another type of beetle you might see on the ground is called the tiger beetle. And basically, they are effective predators on all sorts of different insects. And you will typically find them on sidewalks. There's a particular species here called the sidewalk tiger beetle, or sparse grasslands. And then the larvae like to make a little burrow hole in the soil, as you see in the top right picture there. And these are really cool insects. These are assassin bugs. And these guys basically are incredible predators. They grab their prey with their long forelegs, and then they use their beak-like mouth parts to pierce their prey. And it can be hard to tell. They look similar to seed bugs, but I would say just they tend to be black and brown, and just look for the long legs and the needle-like beak. And now we have soldier beetle. So these guys are usually thin with red or orange colors, and only the larvae are predators. Adults feed on nectar, pollen, and some other insects. Typically, you'll find a species of these beetles on yellow flowers during the end of summer. Yellowjackets and hornets. I know they are aggressive. They are aggressive pests to us as humans, but they can also be very effective predators. Just keep that in mind. But I'm not saying keep a nest in your backyard if you have small children. Be sure and get rid of that if you do. The much less aggressive European paper wasp was introduced here in 2000, and they like to prey on caterpillars. And spiders, yes, I know they look scary, but please don't freak out and spray pesticide. These guys are good guys. They will help manage pests in your garden, and they are much more beneficial than not. Okay, so now we're moved from the beneficial insects to parasitoids. So parasitoids, or the body snatchers, like to pretty much they use an organ called the ovipositor to inject their prey, their young, into a host insect, and the young eventually pretty much exploits that the young's resources, and eventually bursts out and goes off into the world. And they're called parasitoids because, unlike parasites, they always kill their host, and only wasps or flies are in this category. And here's just a nice illustration of what parasitoids do. Step 1, lay your eggs in a responsible host. Step 2, watch your baby grow inside a safe environment. Step 3, welcome your baby bug into the world. So here are just the main differences between predators and parasitoids. Predators tend to be fast moving. They have a lot larger mouth parts. They can have enlarged front legs, and they can be predators as larvae or adults. And many of them feed on nectar and pollen. And parasitoids are only generally small wasps, or they can be flies. And any stage can be a host, though I've really only heard of the larvae being a host in all the species I've heard of, and it will eventually kill the host. and the adults only feed on pollen and nectar. They're not predators in any way. All right, so parasitoid wasps. So what they do is basically they use their long, it looks like a stinger, but it's actually called the ovipositor, and it deposits their young into the host. The brachionoid wasp likes to, the brachionoid wasp likes to lay their eggs on the tomato hornworm, which you see in the left picture. So if you see a tomato hornworm that looks like that, that's a good thing. And the inchinoid wasp tends to go for aphids. And if you look at the top middle picture right there, you can see there's some parasitized aphids, and we like to call those aphid mummies. And then there's one of the most amazing species that we have here in Colorado or Western North America. It's called the giant incumbent wasp, which has an ovipositor more than twice as long as its body, and it pretty much uses this ovipositor to deposit its eggs in grubs. Deposit its eggs in grubs inside tree trunks. And it's just amazing. It's quite something to see this. So there are commercially available products, but you have to do research, and you have to keep in mind. See, there's always going to be these ladybugs, these adult ladybugs available for purchase. But in the wise words of Whitney Crenshaw, former CSU entomology professor, once you put the ladybugs out there, they tend to fly away, like very far away. They migrate. So instead, be sure you get the larvae, because not only are the larvae unable to fly away, but they also eat 10 times more than the adults on average per day. So that's going to be a much more costly investment than just getting these ladybugs that fly away and supposedly don't do anything. All right, so the beneficial insects we went over a little bit ago. It's really important to have a garden where you can attract these beneficials. So you want to make sure you provide all different types of flowers to do this, and you want to make sure everything is present all in the ecosystem, and basically try and create a complex habitat with your garden as well. Providing floral resources, so both annuals and perennials. Many beneficials prefer white or yellow flowers. Smaller insects need smaller flowers, and beneficials need to feed often. Another thing I would say, though, is plant a lot of native plants. That's really gonna do some good and invite native beneficials into your garden. And provide habitat. So one thing you can do is mulch to enhance ground nesting sites, and you can do different heights of plants to provide shade or microclimates, which is essentially how I describe it, as a smaller climate within a. So the shade that some plants provide, that could be a microclimate for some organisms. Provides anchors, shelters, and all sorts of other things. All right, so now we go on to pathogens. So pathogens can be bacteria, fungi, viruses, or nematodes. A very common and widely used bacteria is the soil-borne bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT for short. Essentially, what it does is when it's ingested by the insect, it causes the gut of the insect to leak, which leads to paralysis or and eventually death. And then there's the fungi, Bavaria bassiana, which is a soil-borne fungi. And what that does is it puts its spores into the cuticle, and essentially it poisons the muscles, grows and poisons the muscles of the insect, causing paralysis and death. So those are two main ones that are used. So the good thing about biocontrolled pathogens is that they're basically they're only focused on insects and organisms, very specific. So they're non-toxic to humans and mammals, and some are broad spectrum, meaning they work on a variety of different insects. Others are selective, which means they only work on a specific type. And effectiveness can vary, and insects can develop resistance to this. And we're going to go over this in a lot more detail when we get to pesticides. Okay, now we're on to cultural control. So cultural control is essentially modifications to the environment that reduce pests. And just like biological control, this method requires a good understanding of pests, plants, and the ecosystem. And some examples are crop rotation, tilling, mulching, etc. So cultural control can be as simple as picking up dropped fruit off the ground, because some of the pest insects can develop a whole new generation inside that fruit. So it's very important to pick that up. Mulching reduces weeds and can also provide some nutrients to the plant. And planting crops densely can also reduce weeds. So crop rotation is a good way to minimize pests and also recycle nutrients into the soil. Essentially, it means you plant one crop one year and you might move to a different crop the next year, or you might leave that bed blank and plant something the following year. And pruning can also increase airflow and reduce the risk of fungal diseases. All right, so cultural control for vegetable gardens. As I mentioned before, good airflow. So pruning helps with that. Mulching prevents splashing of pathogens. Also helps prevent weeds. So watering. So when you water plants, you want to make sure you don't water the leaves or the stem if you can help it. You only want to water at the ground. And drip irrigation can really help with that. So crop rotation, plants belonging to the same family are susceptible to similar diseases. And crop rotation reduces damage from pests and diseases, but also it manages the fertility of the topsoil. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s was caused by not doing crop rotation, and pretty much all the nutrients in the topsoil wore away and you got the Dust Bowl. So another way you can do cultural control is the phenology of pests. Basically, it's a study of timed events in biological life cycles. And now, how does that work to pests? Well, if you understand the timing between the pest and the host, it can be very helpful. So let's say you have this pest starts feeding at a particular time of day. You might put a barrier over that time of day, over the plant, or if you have a soil pest, you might turn over the soil, just things like that. Another really good example is basically barley yellow dwarf virus was becoming a problem for wheat farmers, and the aphid that vectors this disease only really likes young plants. And so what the farmers started doing is they started sowing their seeds earlier in the season to disrupt that timing between the plant and the pest that feeds on it, so that they wouldn't have near as much problem with the virus. All right, so another method you can do is called trap cropping. So trap cropping essentially is a diversion tactic. Basically, you put a crop close to the main crop that's either it's the same or similar to the main crop, or it's something the pest will be attracted to. And it should be planted 8 to 12 feet away from the main crop. And basically, it can be destroyed or thrown away to prevent further spread of the pest. So a good example is usually, like I said before, usually pests are attracted to plants in a certain family. So let's say you have a pest that likes tomatoes. Well, you might plant something like eggplant or peppers that are in the same family, but you really need to know the pest and what it likes to use this method properly. And then intercropping or companion planting is the last one I'm going to go over here. And what that is essentially planting two crops together, and one of them, basically, it can increase yield, but it can also repel pests from another crop or physically shield other plants. A good example of this is onions are planted next to carrots to deter the carrot rust fly. Another more common example I've seen is, even though it's never really been scientifically proven, is marigolds and tomatoes. Marigolds appear to deter nematodes. So cultural control applies to lawns as well. If you want to have that great lawn that your neighbors envy, basically you need to, this is essentially prevention is what it is. It goes back to the prevention principle. So you want to do some more deep and infrequent watering that improves drought tolerance. You want to do winter watering when possible. And you want to be sure to do winter watering on a warmer day. Don't do it when it's below zero. That's not going to be good for the plant or your pipe system. Aerate in the spring or fall, and mow to no less than 3 inches height. And returning the grass clippings or the mulch that you cut from the grass will return nutrients to the soil, and overseed when necessary. So basically, these are two diseases associated with lawns that are common in Colorado. Basically, so on the left, we have necrotic ring spot, And this typically affects Kentucky bluegrass lawns. And basically, it's caused by a fungus. And as you can see, you'll see if you look at the picture, you'll see like it's making rings. And if you have this, you want to make sure to reduce watering. And then on the right, we have Ashikata leaf blight, which is I would say essentially it's caused by abiotic factors. And it can appear year round. It can appear it's mostly on Kentucky bluegrass, but it can also appear on perennial ryegrass called fescue. And basically, if you have it, you want to make sure to increase your watering. So here we move on to our final type of control, which is chemical control, and essentially uses chemicals or natural and synthetic to kill pests. It can have negative effects on the environment if used correctly. It can also worsen pest problems when used incorrectly, which we'll go over in a little bit. It's usually used as a last resort. So chemical control, usually you want to, I want to stress that, can't stress this enough, before using any pesticide, always read the label and follow the instructions. Always, never, it's in violation, and the pesticide labels will say it's in violation of federal law to use in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. But pesticides can be naturally derived or they can be synthetic, and they can range from selective, specific, to broad spectrum, multiple, and they can have short or long persistence in the environment. Okay, so these are pesticide labels, and this is what you really want to look for when you read those labels. The first one is obviously the brand name. Know if it's trustworthy or not. The product type. In this case, it's insecticidal soap, which is a type of soap that's designed to kill insects. Look at the ingredients and what it's supposed to kill. In this case, aphid, thrips, mites, other listed pests. You have to turn it over and read it. And be aware of, here are the ingredients. And be aware of words like caution, warning, or danger. And now we go to another part of the label, the harvest safety. So that's when you can, pretty much it will tell you when you can safely harvest your crop after the pesticide is used. The pest life cycle, which it will tell you what stages of life or what its effect, which stages of life the thing is, or the pesticide is effective on. The use site, where you're supposed to use it, when to use, that's important as well. The EPA registration number. And okay, and then here's some other things to look for. Read the instructions. Always read the instructions. Never use a pesticide without reading instructions. Can't stress that enough. The use site is where you can use it safely. Very important. These are the type of pests that it targets. And environmental hazards, you definitely want to check that. And always want to properly dispose of these pesticides. You don't want to just throw it in the trash. You need to know how to properly dispose of them so that they don't leak into the environment. Okay, so there are two different types of pesticides. There's natural and synthetic. So natural pesticides are naturally derived from either botanicals or minerals, such as pyrethrum, which naturally comes from chrysanthemums. And then synthetic pesticides are human-made chemicals that are based on the natural insect, that are based on the natural, but they've just been modified to work better. An example is pyrethroids. Another example is nicotinoids in tobacco, and then neonicotinoids. But neonicotinoids have been banned in some countries because of effect on pollinators. Organic pesticides. What does organic mean? Well, anything that contains carbon. It's approved for certified organic production. It naturally comes from basically these also tend to have a lower toxicity and environmental impact. But not all pesticides are approved for organic, and not all synthetics are banned. All right, selectivity. As I mentioned before, selective is targets a specific species. So 2,4-D does broadleaf weeds, BT does caterpillars or grubs, soap bomb is soft-bodied insects. And you need to know what type of pest you're working with in order to use selective. And then broad spectrum, like Roundup or glyphosate, it targets many different types of plants, such as broadweed or grasses, dandelion, quackgrass, or Bermuda, and they may have harmful effects on non-target species. So persistence is essentially how long this pesticide is going to take for this pesticide to break down into the environment. So generally, the higher persistence it has, the more toxic it's going to be to the environment. All right, and now this is different modes of action. Okay. So the modes of action. So this is how pesticides work. So contact poisons can either work by direct contact, spraying it on the pest, or secondary contact, the pest crawls on a leaf that has the pesticide on it. Then there's also ingestion, and this generally only works on systemic pesticides, which we'll go over in a minute. Repellent, which repels the insect. A fumigant, which is kept in a can and pretty much uses aerosols in the can to kill pests. And then lure and kill is pretty self-explanatory. So what a systemic a pesticide does is it spreads throughout the plant tissue. And so obviously that will kill a pest that will ingest the plant. Good example of this is that they've done BT corn. They've actually put Bacillus thuringius in the plant tissues of the corn. That's one good example. Generally, it's not for food crops for obvious reasons, though BT was worked out apparently to not have that problem. And be very cautious when using it on or near flowers. Also, be really careful. I would not use it if you plant your flowers and your vegetables right next to each other. That's just going to have cause for trouble right there. All right, so now we're going to go over pesticide misuse. Pesticides can be useful tools in IPM. However, the misuse can not only cause harm to the ecosystem, but it can also make things worse for pest control overall. How can they do that, you might ask? Beware of 3 R's that are associated with pesticide misuse that will destroy your garden. The awful resurgence, the horrible replacement, and the most deadly of them all, resistance. So resurgence occurs when the pesticide that's used to kill the pest also kills the natural enemies that control them. This can cause a rebound in the pest, which sometimes exceed original numbers. A good example of this is the strawberries and the cyclamen mites. So the cyclamen mites typically prey on the developing leaves or flower buds of the strawberries. And then there are the predatory mites that crawl outside the leaves looking for something to eat. Well, when a pesticide was applied, it ended up killing all of the predatory mites, while the cyclamen mites were safe in their own little haven in the leaves and buds, and that caused a humongous rebound of this pest, higher than before the treatment. And then there's replacement. So this is similar to resurgence. Instead, though, replacement occurs when pesticides kills the pest and the natural predators and results in the rise of a new pest. Good example, this is spider bites. Spider mites used to not be much of a problem. However, due to widespread pesticide use, which eliminated their predators and their competition, it caused the spider mites to multiply into the pest we know today. And the most deadly of them all, resistance. This is the one that this is the most important of them all. So basically, it occurs when pesticides applied too many times, resulting in a population developed immunity and therefore making it useless. In other words, evolution. So let me explain how this works. So if you look at the top left picture there, you'll notice you've got a bunch of blue bugs and a red bug. So that red bug possesses the genes to resist the pesticide. And so once it gets, when the pesticide gets sprayed, if you look at the top right picture, it's going to take out most of the blue bugs, but the red bug is still going to be there. Then the red bug is going to pass on those genes to the next generation, and essentially you'll keep getting more red bugs, which have the genes to repel the pesticide, and that's going to make the pesticide completely useless. So what can you do about resistance? Well, there's a couple things you can do. The most typical way you can do it is to alternate between pesticides. So that will prevent, but essentially this will prevent pests developing one resistance to one pesticide. And and basically another strategy is called providing a refuge. So what you do is you treat one part of your crop with a pesticide and you leave the other part untreated. That will give a chance for the resistant pest to mate with the non-resistant pest, and essentially this slows down the process. they'll create, they may make a offspring that is non-resistant. And another thing, resistance is not limited to just pesticides. Pests can change their behaviors and their genes to resist other control methods as well. As I mentioned before, with biological control, they can develop resistance to pathogens. So you have to be careful to not rely on that. But they can also change their behavior. So here we have a little bugger known as the Western corn rootworm, which is a humongous corn pest. So in order to keep these guys down, basically we started using crop rotation. However, it found a loophole. Basically, these guys went into what we call diapause, which essentially is hibernation for insects, except it can happen any time of year. And this diapause caused them to emerge every 2 years instead of 1. So they would have access to the corn when it was planted the following year. And this is just another reminder to never rely on one tactic. All right, so now we are on to review. Basically, first thing you want to do is make sure you try your best to prevent pest problems from emerging in the first place, which basically take care of your plants. And if that doesn't work and if a problem arises, basically you want to identify your pest and see if it's causing enough problems for you to be worried about it. And then what are you willing to tolerate in pest control and what are your options? So and if you have any questions or concerns, you can always contact us. So our helpline and mobile clinics are open from Mondays and Thursdays from 10 to 1 p.m. And we are located at the library. If you pretty much go straight into the library, you go to the right and then you turn to the right again and you keep going down, you will see our office. And then our Ask a Master Gardener booth is running once a month at the library and once a month at the farmer's market right now. We'll be having one at the library this Saturday if you would like to stop by with your plant questions. And you can always contact us by phone or email. All right, so does anyone have any questions about what they've learned?
Thank you, Jocelyn. That was great. And I meant to say this at the beginning, but I neglected to. If you're on the Zoom, you can type in the Q&A box for Jocelyn to answer. I do have a question from Facebook I can read to you, Jocelyn. The question is a hoverfly a fat, long bug?
No, not really. They're quite small. As far as, well, they can actually range. There are different species that have different sizes, I've noticed. But I think the most common one, I would say, is around a few inches, maybe. They're not they're not that big and noticeable.
Thanks. And they have a waist, right? They're fairly skinny, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Oh, actually, if you notice that bottom left corner picture, you notice the bug on the right, that's a type of fly. So that happens to be a good analogy on how big it is compared to a bee. They're usually smaller than bees.
That's all I am seeing. We can hang out for a sec. We can probably stop the recording. And thank you so much again, Jocelyn. And if anyone has more questions, please reach out anytime.
Good job, Jocelyn.
Thanks.
It is a pleasure to listen to you talk about bugs and related things.
Oh, is there something? Oh.
I can go and end this for you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your help, Erin. Appreciate it.